Yeah, SUNSfan. So I know you've been playing Dota for a really long time and you've been in the scene. How exactly did you get started in playing Dota?
Well, I was a Counter-Strike player way back in the day, as in, God, I have to actually look at the year now, 16 years ago. And that's when I started competitive gaming. And Dota really translated well to Counter-Strike. I would say it's the Counter-Strike of the genre. And I got started at that probably, I don't know what year it was, but I played it for 5 years, I would say. And then I switched over to Heroes of Newerth for a couple and then on to Dota 2. So the fact that it translated really well, even though it's an FPS game in Counter-Strike, I found a lot of comparisons, and it was easy for me to get into, especially considering I was playing Warcraft 3 at the time.
What was it about Dota that drew you to that game specifically?
I just like games that are competitive from an esports standpoint. Even back then when esports wasn't really a thing per se, I mean, it kind of was to a certain degree, but just the fact that I mean, maybe it wasn't as balanced as it is now, but I saw the potential. And for whatever reason, I've just always been drawn to games that are competitively viable, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And at what point were you playing Dota and decided to become a personality?
That happened in Heroes of Newerth, actually. So that was my transition between Dota and Dota 2. I was going for my master's program at the time, and I really hated it. And I emailed IceFrog once I heard the announcement of Dota 2. I was like, good job. I'm really excited for this. And then I asked him for some advice, just like typical kid would do. And I was shocked that he responded. And I used that as motivation to try to do something with my life as far as like what my passions were. And that was to be, it wasn't about being a personality, it was just doing something in esports. And for that, the opening was to be a caster in Heroes of Newerth, which I started there and then just made the transition to Dota 2 once it came out.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, SUNSfan, that means you were really a part of Dota 2 from the ground up. As you said, you're getting in touch with IceFrog in the first place. That's a really awesome experience to have. With being a personality in Dota, one of the things that I've seen across watching the International, for example, and in past matches that get streamed through Twitch and now YouTube Gaming, everything along those lines, do you feel like there's not enough personalities in Dota 2? What are you trying to bring specifically, I should say, that really makes you stand out? Because you've built a hell of a big following so far.
Well, to answer your first question, there are so many personalities. There's always room for more, I think. But the thing that I would say that I bring is a little bit of silliness. Like, I don't take myself too seriously, as you can tell by the shirt. And, like, I don't know, I'm maybe not considered the most professional person, but I think that's kind of a good thing for esports. Like, looking at TI, it was a really good TI this year, but I thought they were a little bit too professional. They're trying to cater to an audience that really isn't there. They're trying to copy sports, traditional sports, and I think it's not like a huge mistake, but I think it's like if you guys go way back to the Counter-Strike days, what I was alluding to earlier, there was a thing called CGS, which was a huge tournament/league, or I don't know what you want to call it, but it was sponsored by DirecTV, and it was the biggest thing of its kind. And the biggest downfall of that is that they were catering to the completely wrong audience by being too professional, as they would say.
Well,
Yes, I'm unprofessional in a nutshell.
So this year's International was the first one that I was able to go to, and I had a blast. It was one of the most fun sporting events I've honestly ever been to. You've probably been to years in the past. How did this year's International stack up, and where do you think they were getting too professional? Maybe they should look at old internationals maybe to come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this natural progression of trying to get better, and I think their scope is just a little bit too narrow. But overall, this TI was by far the best. I mean, if you're going to compare TIs, TI3, the finals was more exciting technically, but I mean, I was rooting for EG this year, so it's not like it was a bad thing at all. But I don't know. It's tough to compare them because each year is so different. Each meta is so different, and a lot of it has to do with the gameplay this year being much more exciting. But as far as what I thought they could have changed, being less professional, like the panel, I mean, it was good at times. It's good to have like the competitive insight and just talking about the integral parts of the game and what people did wrong, what they did right, and things to expect in upcoming games. But you can be a little bit silly about it. Like if you looked at TI, was it 2? Was the intro or the debut of Bruno that's like the perfect example of a little bit of silliness that could have been implemented into the broadcast, I thought.
I actually wanted to get your input on the new mid-majors coming up. How do you think that's going to impact the game? Obviously, Valve has been doing the International for 5 years now, but there's going to be actually Valve-sponsored large tournaments in different parts of the world. How do you think that'll impact the scene? Do you think it adds more stability? Did you like the way the tournaments used to set up? What do you think about that?
It's a mix. Since I'm kind of in, like, I don't know, I have a lot of... I have a team now. I have a YouTube channel which runs tournaments, and I'm associated in a lot of different other things. So it's tough to give like a black and white reaction. But the best way to sum it up is it has pros and cons. So the pros for major system is more stability for the players and technically the teams. But at the same time, you have the drawback of there being 4 different periods in which players can shuffle. And I don't know if that's going to happen to as large a degree as it did this summer. I knew that this summer was going to be pretty hardcore as far as shuffles were concerned. I mean, even like you said, the TI winning team switched out a player and had all this drama. But from the other side, from a tournament organizer's standpoint, it's actually pretty bad unless you're one of the big ones. So like for us, we ran Captain's Draft last year, which was one of the biggest online-only tournaments ever. And this year, it's like super uncertain what to expect. Like, I don't know if I can get items in the game for the tournament. I don't know. Like, Valve isn't exactly the most communicative entity out there, and that's part of the problem, I suppose. So that for the organizer, it's a little bit unclear what to expect. From the players, I think it's definitely a plus.
I guess one more question I had off that is, the volatility in Dota, I think, is very unique in a sports sense. Like, you don't see NBA teams or NFL teams like just blowing up right after something happens. Why do you think there's so much turnover from team to team? It seems like monthly. Like, Navi had a different captain 3 times this year. So, like, what's that about?
Well, for Navi specifically, it's because they're just used to a different standard, right? It's like the Los Angeles Lakers is a perfect example because they just feel so desperate to get back to the top. I mean, the Suns, technically speaking, they're the 5th most successful franchise in NBA history, although they've never won a championship. But they don't feel nearly as desperate as somebody like the Lakers who've won 16 or whatever it is championships. So that would be the case for Navi. For every other team, I think it comes down to a lot to the majors because people are a little bit uncertain what to expect. Now we're starting to get more information, so I think it'll be solidified at least to a certain degree. But I mean, at the end of the day, you have to think about the team, the organizations don't and I learned this very recently, the organizations don't really have control over the roster. Like, they could technically kick somebody off the team or something like that, but you really don't want to. You want the team to create the team for you. Like, for us, as an example, we talked to AUI and he formed the team because we want him to play with people he wants to play with, if that makes sense. So, and at the end of the day, a lot of them are kids. Like, AUI is not one. He's actually one of the more mature players in the scene, but having kids run teams can sometimes be troubling, I guess, and you'll have turnover as a result from time to time.
That's a really good point because the pressures of that in general, I mean, it would be the same as, I want to make, again, the comparison back to the NBA just to keep both sports audiences, esports and sports audiences, kind of can see the similarities between the two. It would really be as if Andrew Wiggins gets drafted last year and at 18 years old is the captain of the team. Even though Kevin Garnett was back on the Timberwolves, it's like, no, you're 18, you're going to take control of this, you're going to be the leader, which for certain ones it does work out. LeBron James kind of made that claim by the time he was 20. But there is certain Dota players who I'm sure can handle that. But you're right, they are kids. So, I mean, what was the one story of recent where there was the 16-year-old Dota player who won
the championship? Yeah, he's 16 years old.
And that came with how much? What was the paycheck for that?
Like over $1 million per person.
Okay, so yeah, that's a decent amount of money to make at 16
Not
years
too
old.
bad.